Good morning, all. I'm Miha Gallagher, Senior Research Director of Destination Analysts, and it's my pleasure to be with you today to present the latest findings on how Americans are thinking, feeling, approaching their decision-making and behaving when it comes to travel in the period of COVID-19 from our Coronavirus Travel Sentiment Index study. Before we get into our presentation of research, we want to acknowledge the passing of a hero, transformational civil rights leader and Atlanta Congressman John Lewis. John, rest in power. We all stand on your shoulders and promise to keep making humanity better, even if we have to get into good trouble. For those of you joining us today who we have not had the pleasure of meeting or working with yet, Destination Analyst is a market research firm that provides deep insights into your audience's brand and marketing performance. Since our founding nearly 2 decades ago, more than 200 travel and hospitality organizations have partnered with us to research and answer their most urgent and important questions. And on the agenda for today, we will review the latest on American traveler sentiment in the time of COVID, take a look at the Travel Marketing Potential Influence Index to understand the travel readiness of different segments, and we'll end the show today with an in-depth discussion with meeting planners about the industry's recovery. Every week since March 15th, we've surveyed 1,200 Americans who have traveled in the pre-pandemic time from each of the 4 major regions of the US. After the data is collected, it is weighted by geography and demographics. And the confidence interval of the top line findings is plus or minus 2.8%. And my update today reflects data collected this past weekend between July 17th through the 19th. In a time of a lot of studies and data, this research is unique in that it's produced by us as an independent third-party research company with the primary objective of providing you reliable and unbiased information upon which to base your decisions. And joining me from Destination Analyst today are our founder and managing director, Dave Bratton, and our vice president, Kimberly Vince Cruz. They are here to answer any and all questions you have about the research findings that come up during the presentation. And we encourage you to ask questions, and you can do so by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. To answer the #1 question we get each week, yes, we will send you the presentation deck via email later today. This and all decks from our past webinars will also be available for download on our website. You can go to destinationanalyst.com/COVID-webinars. And this week marks the 19th week of this study, and believe it or not, we're almost through the month of July. And so much has changed in the weeks that we've spent together, including how kids skip school in 2020. Back in my day, which I know in the cosmic calendar was not that long ago, skipping school took careful and thoughtful planning. And now kids can disengage by the push of a button. Also new to 2020 are welfare checks from my local delivery drivers, which should serve as a reminder to curb my online shopping, or so my husband says, but I'll let you all know how that goes in the weeks to come. To put these findings in greater context, I wanted to share some headlines from this past week. So when American travelers answered our questions this week, coronavirus cases in the US surpassed 3.6 million, with nearly 139,000 deaths. Florida and Texas hospitals are also becoming overwhelmed with new surges in cases. And amid the new outbreaks, more states are rolling back reopening plans, and even more retailers are now requiring masks in their businesses. So with all of that in mind, let's see how Americans are feeling about travel right now. Now, 62% of Americans agree that they will avoid all travel until the coronavirus situation abates. And this figure has been growing for the past 5 weeks. And expectations to return to travel in the fall continue to decline. Just last month, the proportion of those who expected to be traveling again by autumn was greater than those who disagreed. But now 41% of Americans do not expect to be traveling come the fall months, with a third, at least for now, who say they will be traveling. And since the end of April, we've also asked Americans if they would hold off on travel until a COVID vaccine is developed. And over the last couple of months, we've been largely split on this topic, with about a third agreeing and another third disagreeing. However, at the start of July through now, we've seen a significant and consistent shift towards agreement, and this week 44% say they will not travel until there is a vaccine. For 19 weeks, we've asked Americans this question. In the next month, how, if at all, do you expect the severity of the coronavirus situation in the US to change? And now, 59.8% expect the coronavirus situation to get worse in the next month, down slightly from 62.7% who said the same last week, and just 16% expect it to improve. Let's look at how this has trended over time. Now, the orange line represents those who felt the pandemic would get worse or much worse in the country in the next month, and the blue line represents those who felt it would get better or much better. Now, there was a peak in pessimism about the pandemic the week of April 5th, but by April 19th, we had reached an equilibrium, which remained for the next 3 weeks before a gap widened up again the week of May 11th as states began reopening. We approached an equilibrium over the next few weeks, after which the gap has widened up once more deaths in the US per day on March 13th, at which time there were 5 reported COVID deaths in the US per day. And as we all know, we saw a sharp rise in mortality around April 19th, with sadly over 2,600 reported deaths that day. And over the next few weeks, this figure had steadily decreased. And at the start of May, we had about 2,200 COVID-related deaths reported that day. Fast forward to now, we are down to just under 1,000 reported daily deaths. So at the beginning of this study, as I mentioned, there was strong expectations of the health crisis worsening, which was followed by the huge rise in confirmed cases and deaths. Shortly thereafter, Americans had anticipated improvements to the situation, which was followed by a gradual decline in confirmed COVID deaths. Now we're in another period of worsening expectations. And if this is a sign of what's to come in the weeks to follow, we as a country need to brace ourselves and do what we can to protect ourselves and to protect each other. Now, I know this outlook is grim, but not everyone is feeling that the situation is so dire. So let's take a look at those who are optimistic about this health crisis improving in the next month. Now, although a majority of all generations feel the situation will get worse in the next month, millennials are less likely to feel that things will worsen compared to older traveling Americans. Now, by region, those who reside in the Northeast and the South are more optimistic than those in the West and Midwest. Business travelers are also more optimistic than their counterparts. Similarly, conventioneers are also more optimistic. Looking at those who traveled by air versus those who have not show no discernible differences. And the same with residential status. Suburban, urban, and rural residents almost mirror each other in terms of their outlook on the coronavirus situation. Lastly, cruise passengers show higher levels of optimism than non-cruisers. And by political affiliation, Democrats were significantly more likely to feel the situation will worsen. Republicans, on the other hand, were more likely to be optimistic. Concerns about personally contracting the virus remain elevated. Now 72.5% say they have some level of concern, down slightly from 75.3% last week. And the gap between those who are highly concerned about contracting the coronavirus versus those who are not widened this week. Another way of looking at this is for every one person who has little to no concern about contracting COVID, 4.6 are concerned. Concerns about the safety of friends and family from the virus also remain high, with 77.5% expressing concern for the safety of their loved ones. However, this is down from 79.9% last week. There is also a wide gap between those who are concerned for friends and family versus those who are not. And for every one person who has little concern about their friends and family getting sick, 6.2 people show higher levels of concern. Although not nearly to the degree as their health safety, the increase in outbreaks continues to affect the traveler's sense of financial security, as concerns about the virus impacts on their personal finances remain high, with 58.8% concerned, and this is down slightly from 59.9% last week. Now, the gap between those who are concerned for their personal finances due to COVID and those who are not grew closer this week. And for every one person who has little to no concern about the virus's impact on their finances, 2.4 people have some level of concern. Similarly, concerns about the national economy remain high. Unchanged from last week, 85.7% expressed a high level of concern for our nation's economic future. Unlike the concern for personal finances, the gap between those who are concerned for the national economy versus those who are not remain wide. And for every one person who has little concern, 15.3 people have some level of concern about the national economy. As a final visual reminder, a number of safety perceptions for a variety of different travel-related activities. And this chart is showing you the percent who rated each of these activities that we are tracking as either somewhat unsafe or very unsafe. In general, non-personal private transportation and experiences associated with uncertainty, crowds, or indoor confinement, they continue to be viewed as unsafe. Meanwhile, non-team outdoor recreation, road trips, seeing friends and relatives, and shopping continues to be perceived as relatively safer activities. And if we average the perceived risk of all of the travel activities we track, 60.6% feel unsafe. Let's now take a look at how we reached a peak in the perception of. Then there was a fairly steady decline until June 5th, when Americans felt the safest they had about travel activities since our benchmark on March 15th. However, since then, there's been a steady increase in the average perceived risk of these activities. And right now, we've returned to levels last seen in late April. In addition to tracking specific activities, we've started tracking the perceived safety of certain domestic leisure trip types. And this chart is showing you the percent who felt each was somewhat unsafe or very unsafe. And topping the list as the perceived least safe trip types was trips to attend festivals or other special events, followed by trips to attend sporting events, which edged out urban vacations. In contrast, the perceived safest domestic trip types amongst those tested were wine country trips had seen excitement for near-term travel grow until around the reopening, after which excitement became depressed as cases have begun to surge again throughout the country. And openness to travel information decreased again this week. Now 36.6% of Americans are excited to learn about new travel experiences. And again, the positive momentum built over May into early June has reversed by earned or paid online media, such as articles and blogs, and social channels, such as Facebook and Instagram. When asked the single best way to reach American travelers right now, email surpassed all other mediums.
Hey, Kim, it's Dave here. It looks like Miha's been dropped out. Shall we just pick up where she left off?
Yes, absolutely. I will go ahead and pick up, and I think she is going to try to phone in. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Apologies to everyone.
Yeah, sorry, everybody. So we were on the single best channel to reach travelers. When asked the single best way to reach American travelers right now, email had surpassed all other mediums that were tested. So now let's dig into what has become a highly contentious topic, which is mask wearing. We asked Americans if they felt people should be wearing masks in public right now. Thankfully, contrary to some of the insane stories and viral videos we've seen over the last few months, most travelers strongly agree with this statement and only 7% disagree.
Looks like Miha's back in, Kim, if you want to let her take over.
Yes, great. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and I'll mute myself so you can jump in here.
If this happens again, Miha, we'll just finish up for you, okay?
Yes.
Great, I'm back on now. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but thank you guys for bearing with me. Okay, so just picking up where Kim left off. When asked how often they personally wear a mask out in public, 2/3 of Americans said they always don a mask. And for those who said they only usually, sometimes, or rarely, or never wear a mask in public, we asked them to share the reasons why they don't always do so. And of those who do not always wear a mask, nearly half of this group attributed this to being in situations where it's not necessary due to few people being around. 1 in 5 also say they sometimes forget their masks, and just under 1 in 5 say they don't feel masks are necessary, period. However, I do want to remind you that this is 18% of the 33% who don't always wear masks. So only 6% overall feel masks in general are not necessary. When it comes to traveling in the next 6 months, we wanted to know what safety protocols travelers would personally engage in, and found a majority said that they will wear a face mask, follow social distancing guidelines, avoid crowds, and carry hand sanitizer. Far fewer, just 37%, say they will only eat restaurant takeout and not eat at a sit-down service. When asked how they would feel if a destination they wanted to visit required residents and visitors to wear masks in public, 2/3 said they would be happy, including 41% who said this would make them very happy. And I was curious about the small group who said they would be unhappy about such a requirement, so we did a little segmentation to learn more about this group. So those who would be unhappy about destinations requiring masks, they are less concerned about their personal safety and the safety of their loved ones. They're also less likely to know someone who has contracted COVID, and they are 2 times as likely to feel that the situation will improve in this country in the next month. In addition, they also skewed male. They're a little less affluent, less educated, less ethnically diverse, and more likely to live in rural areas. So I am personally one of the many who are happy to see destinations requiring face masks in public. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, my husband and I took a day trip to Breckenridge to celebrate our 1-year wedding anniversary. And before our trip, I was on the DMO website looking for things to do in the area, and immediately was greeted with this message. Now, this was the first trip we had taken since being on lockdown since late March, and admittedly, I was a little nervous, but after seeing this, it made me much more comfortable about visiting the area. And this was also a billboard that we drove past on our trip. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the state, the Colorado Office of Tourism, and all of the local DMOs here in Colorado for the great work they've been doing to remind residents and travelers of the importance of taking care and being mindful of one another. And although I am a California girl at heart, I am very proud to be a Coloradan now. Now, for those travelers who said they would be neutral, unhappy, or very unhappy if a destination they wanted to visit required masks in public, we asked if this requirement alone would be enough to keep them from visiting. And half of this group said no, but 20% said it would keep them from visiting a place that they otherwise wanted to visit. And as a reminder, this is only 20% of the 33% who would feel neutral or unhappy about a mandated mask ordinance, which only represents 6% overall. And taking this one step further, we asked all travelers how they would feel if a destination were to fine people who do not wear masks in public. Again, travelers are largely in support of this, with 57% saying fines for non-compliance would make them feel happy or very happy. On the other side, just under 1 in 5 said that they would be unhappy, resulting in a 3-to-1 ratio of happy to unhappy consumers. Now, before we move on to the next section, I do have an incredibly important question to ask you. With all of this talk of masks and how it will be a necessary part of our travel journeys from start to finish for the foreseeable future, I want to know, how do you think I'd look in a custom-made mask featuring my Dogson's mug on front and center? You should see a poll coming up on your screen now. And I am crowdsourcing opinions on this to settle a bet with my husband. So please answer truthfully. As we're collecting those results, we'll move on to this next section. So as we all know, the coronavirus pandemic has put the travel industry in its greatest modern crisis. And just 2 months ago, at the end of May, we looked at benchmarks from the past compared to current sentiments because we felt it was important to our learning of how long the road to recovery would be. Now that we're halfway through the summer travel season, let's see if things have changed. For context, Destination Analysts, the State of the American Traveler study, began in 2006, and it is an online survey of American leisure travelers which tracks travel sentiment quarterly. And the last survey that we fielded pre-pandemic was in January of 2020. And in this week's Coronavirus Travel Sentiment Index survey, we asked several identical questions to our State of the American Traveler study in order to understand how travelers feel now compared to a pre-pandemic time. And starting with expectations for trip volume, the proportion of leisure travelers who report they will decrease the number of trips they will take in the next 12 months compared to the previous 12 months has skyrocketed since January. Now 44.4% say they will travel less this year. And these results are unchanged from 2 months ago when we first asked this during the pandemic era. However, January, this was only at 6.8%. And looking at this historically, prior to May of this year, the highest recorded percentage of American travelers to say they would be taking less leisure trips in the coming year compared to the previous year. This was at 28.8% in July of 2008 as the Great Recession loomed. And for context, between December 2007 and June of 2009 of the Great Recession, 8 million jobs were lost, 4 million homes were foreclosed on, and 2.5 million businesses were shuttered. And this ushered in a period of turbulence for travel sentiment and intentions, followed by a long period of reliable growth. Now in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, with 40 million lost jobs, we see the profound shock to travel. And looking at travel spending, the percent of leisure travelers who reports that they will decrease their travel spending this year compared to the past 12 months has also grown sharply. Now 43.4% say they will reduce their travel spending. In May, this figure was slightly higher at 46.6%, but in January of 2020, this figure stood at just 9.4%. Prior to May of this year, the highest recorded percentage of American travelers saying they would be spending less on leisure trips in the coming year compared to the previous year was 29.8%, again during the Great Recession, and here we are now. So looking at travel as a budget priority for Americans, we see that the pandemic will cause a significant portion of Americans to be more budget conscious on their next leisure trip. Only 7% say they expect to be less budget conscious. And when asked to think carefully about how they expect to spend their income in the next year and to rate how high of a priority leisure travel specifically will be in their budget, just over a third of Americans now said it would be at least somewhat of a high priority. Back in January, a record 70.6% of American travelers said that leisure travel would be a priority in their budget. And when we asked this question again back in May, this figure dropped to 27%. And after just about 2 months, this figure has risen a bit to almost 35%. And right now, the typical American traveler expects to spend $2,721 on leisure travel in the next 12 months. However, 36% expect to spend $500 or less on travel in the next 12 months. And although the average spend has increased $360 this week compared to when we last asked this question in May, it is still a drastic decrease from the reported anticipated spend back in January at $3,882. Now, this chart on the right side is showing you the proportion of travelers who anticipated spending between $0 and $500 on leisure travel this year, and that's denoted by the blue line. And this is compared against the proportion who expect to spend over $4,000, which is denoted by the red line. And looking back to January of this year, only 19.5% of Americans anticipated spending $500 or less on leisure travel. And this jumped to 44% in May and has slid back down just a bit to 36% as of July. Conversely, 31% anticipated spending over $4,000 on travel when we asked them back in January, which has plummeted to 14.6% in May, but increased a bit this week to 21%. And with the anticipated reduction in trips over the next year, we wanted to know which types of destinations may suffer the loss of volume. And this chart is showing you the percent of Americans who said that they would be taking at least one trip to each of these destination types in the next 12 months. And the percent planning to take trips to cities fell 25% since January. Small towns decreased slightly, although not as dramatically. Beaches also fell. And the percent saying they will visit a mountain destination has grown a bit. Desert has remained consistent. Theme parks have fallen slightly, while national and other parks have grown. And despite the travel patterns I just described, when asked to rate how excited they were to visit each of these destination types, excitement levels are much lower than they were back in January. However, excitement for beaches, desert destinations, and U.S. national parks have grown slightly since May. All right, let's now take a look at the latest from our travel marketing potential influence calculation. This is an index we've built based on these 4 data points that we are tracking in this exceptional environment. Travel readiness across the traveling American population would look like this in a pre-COVID time, with the majority on the right side of the bell curve. Here is how the curve has tracked over the course of the pandemic, and through May and into June, there had been incremental movement over to the right side of the bell curve. However, in the past few weeks, there has been a shift back to the left. And we track a number of travel segments. When a segment indexes above 25, we consider them to be marketable. And the consistent upward movement of the previous weeks, as I just mentioned, has dropped in the last 5 weeks. By gender, men had generally outpaced women in terms of their travel readiness. However, this week, both are moving closer together. Still though, 20.4% of men said they are already traveling or ready to travel with no hesitations, compared to 15.6% of women. By generation, Gen X continues to index higher than the other generations, partly due to their slight decrease in safety concerns this week compared to the other generations. By region, the South indexed highest. They showed a slight decrease in safety concerns this week, while the other regions showed increases. In addition, travelers in the South showed more excitement for travel and openness for travel messaging this week than other US regions. By residence type, rural residents continue to index higher than their urban and suburban resident counterparts. We release these findings by email each Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern, and you and your colleagues are welcome to join us here each Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern for a deeper dive and discussion into the most recent research findings. And if you have any questions about the research, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature to submit those to our team now. So last week, Dave shared the findings from our survey of meeting planners, and you can download the full summary of findings on our website at destinationanalyst.com/2020meetings. And today we've invited some meeting planners to join the webinar to do a deeper dive into some of the most fascinating findings from that study. To moderate, it is my great pleasure to welcome my wonderful friend, Kimberly Vince-Cruz, who is the Vice President of Destination Analysts. Having spent the last decade conducting market research for the travel and tourism industry, Kim brings a wealth of experience to our clients and is a sought resource for her expertise. Fun fact, during Kim's first ever travel industry conference over a decade ago, she met Claude the albino alligator at the California Academy of Sciences, where he still resides today. Welcome, Kim.
I think it would help if I unmuted myself. Thanks so much, Miha. First and foremost, the verdict is in, and which best describes how you would look in the mask is super cool, reported by 77%, 23% reported complete dork. However, we have had a couple of researchers who have shared that you can be both super cool and complete dork.
That's a great point, thank you.
Well, I'd like to take a moment to welcome our panel of meeting planners to shed light on what's in store for the meetings industry. Debbie, Cynthia, and Stephanie, please go ahead and share your audio and video right now. Debbie Dubose is the CEO and event specialist at Conference Solutions International. She has over 25 years of experience planning conferences, trade shows, and incentive programs. Cynthia Tomei is a senior meeting planner with Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. She's been in the hospitality business for 33 years, including 19 with her current company. And Stephanie Griffith Richardson is the Training and Events Manager at National Legal Aid and Defender Association. With over 19 years of experience, she has worked for the American Hospital Association and the National Minority AIDS Council as a meeting planner. Thanks so much, Debbie, Cynthia, and Stephanie for joining us.
Of course, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to start by talking about virtual events. We're all on a Zoom webinar right now, and many of us who are on the call actually attended a virtual conference last week, the Destinations International Annual Convention. When it comes to virtual conferences and events, what can CVBs do to support meeting planners like yourself?
I'll go.
Cynthia?
I think it really depends, as the answers are going to be for almost everything moving forward in the time of uncertainty. it just depends on the situation. There's going to be some cases where perhaps there's nothing that they can do. Perhaps they can help us promote for future years when we hopefully go back to face-to-face in-person meetings. Or if it's perhaps a destination where you were going to meet this year and you've had to go virtual, if you have the opportunity to do any type of networking, gamification, anything along those lines, they can help you build, say, a scavenger hunt that would be relative to that destination where you would have been physically, but now you're just virtually there.
Okay.
Some of the things that I thought about in hearing that question was it's twofold for me, because we are having to reschedule our meetings virtually, and so that a lot of our meetings are moved to future years, and so that means that we are also contracting in this space in that same anxiety and unknown. And so there are things that we are going to have to, we need the cities to ask the hoteliers and event spaces to be more flexible on, because we are all planning in a level of unknown. And so just asking them to partner to help us to attrition clauses and a little bit more flexibility there, because you don't want to paint yourself in the corner where you're just moving into this new hybrid space, because when the world changes and evolves back into more in-person meetings, you want to have the space that you need, because either we're not booking or we're going so conservative that you don't have the space that you actually need for, like, for instance, 2023 or 2024. And then the other thing is that, providing enough information of what's going on in your city right now is so critical, because people are looking, and you don't want us to have to dig deep to find out. Just like Mia was just talking about, Colorado was very face forward about a mask and what they want to do to keep their cities for. We need to be able to share that with our communities. So that's what they can do. Those two things I think are critical.
Okay, so it sounds like advocating for flexibility and communicating what's going on right now in a way that's easy for you to access. Okay.
Right, that helps us in the present and in the future.
Right, thank you. Debbie, anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of CVBs have members that have services that maybe planners could still use for virtual meetings, whether it be technology for, the audio visual or putting the webinars together, or, I've had a client that did a pretty elaborate virtual meeting recently, and they incorporated a lot of music. They had entertainers. So in that case, they need, a vendor. So maybe CVBs could still reach out to some of their clients, and not only would they be helping the planners, but they would also be helping their members. But I kind of agree with Cynthia. In most cases, there's not a lot that they can do to help with a virtual. But I think the things that we do need right now is information on what we can expect in their city in the future, what the arrival experience is going to look like at airport.
Sure.
Uber will no longer do pools. They used to do the pool share rides. Just what is the experience going to look like in their destination? And then I think also encourage their hotels to start quickly thinking about updating their websites with their new meeting space and capacity with the COVID-19 guidelines, because that's one of the biggest challenges right now, looking at meetings. I have meetings booked through 2016, and we have a certain number of guest rooms, but we really don't know, will we still need that many guest rooms? Can their ballroom still, accommodate 5,000 people? And if they can't, now we have to, totally look at things differently. And then one of the suggestions I had for the CVBs is maybe to put together a COVID-19 advisory board, and have some planners on there and get some feedback from everybody in the industry.
Thank you for sharing that, Debbie. One of the things that you mentioned in terms of how things will look in the future and capacity, that's actually a perfect segue into my next question. And my next question is, when live meetings do return, how do you envision the physical space to look, and how will that be different compared to before?
Get start on that as well.
Yes,
And
yeah.
the answer is going to be, it depends again. It's going to depend on the geographic location, the current status of the COVID situation at that time, the group, what they're comfortable with, what the local or state or, what the guidelines are for any given time for where they are, when they are, and who they are. So that's almost an impossible question to answer until we're in the situation to be physically planning something and knowing all of the information at hand.
I agree. My organization has taken the position that we will not resume travel, and we have a policy about expecting our community, our membership to travel until we are at phase 4. So, a lot of conditions are going to be taken into consideration, and and we are projecting that we will get to phase 4. We're putting good juju out there in the universe. So it's just depending on the organization's philosophy on travel and its members, and then the city in which you're traveling to, and how they are, conducting business.
Okay. Debbie?
Well, of course, the big thing is, the setup, the tables, the chairs, how many chairs will be at a table. I don't think we will see setups like, crescent rounds anymore, because, it just would take up too much space and you can't put the same amount of seats. But I do a lot of programs that have exhibits. So I've been thinking about, what will exhibit halls look like? What will the booths look like? They will be spaced further apart. Some of them will have to have plexiglass. I don't know if, the amount of swag and giveaways will be allowed anymore. And then some of the things that I thought about that would go away, or have already gone away, are buffets. Everything will be packaged. Guests will not be able to serve themselves. A hotel staff would have to serve them. No handshaking. I kind of made a list of the things that we're so used to that we can't do anymore. Even planners and hotels will have to think about logistics. How do you stagger people leaving their guest room and getting into elevators? Because you don't want 20 people in an elevator anymore. And you don't want to encourage people at breaks to all run up to their room and pack in elevators. Bathroom breaks, you don't want the bathrooms packed. So all of these things are, becoming part of the meeting specs. The challenging part is a lot of hotels still don't have these things in place. I don't know if they haven't thought about it, but they just haven't started. So it makes it a little tricky when you're planning even for 2021, if we're able to have conferences, how do we begin to piece this meeting together?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And all of those things you mentioned, they all make sense in terms of things to consider for the future. So for my next question, Miha shared that last week, Dave had presented some of the findings from a recent meeting planner study that we conducted. And in that research, we saw that millennial planners appear to be less engaged with CVBs. What's your take on that? Why do you think that is? Cynthia, I see you nodding your head.
I'll go first again. And first I want to do, a waiver or a caveat here that I am by no means a professional. Actually, nobody in my department is even a millennial, so this is totally perception. There's no factual base. This is personal observation, nothing on my company. I don't want anyone, you know. But from
enough.
what I gathered, from what I experience and witness, my feel is that millennials are very much technology driven, and the CVB planner relationship is so personal. It's building up a relationship. It's building the networks. It's getting to know each other over time. It's not a matter of sending an email or going to a website and submitting something or clicking a button.
Mhm.
So I think those of us who are a little bit older, have been around for a while, have built up that network base. We're more used to picking up the phone or shooting a quick email, setting up a meeting versus hoping to go to a piece of technology to get the information. And so I think just by way of how they were brought up and the habits that they formed based on what was available at their fingertips, it's affected how they work with people versus technology and information. Again,
100.
personal perception.
Okay.
I 100% concur with you, Cynthia. My office is mostly baby boomers, but I do receive that same information. How we even market our conference to our emerging leaders is we use social media and Instagram with a lot of photos, destinations. It's just completely a different market. And it was a hard sell to our our leadership team that like, why are we creating a completely different campaign to market a meeting? But that's how they access information. They're not going to look at a robust email. We have had to really develop our social media campaign, and that's how we were able to communicate with them. So Cynthia, kudos and right on for me, from my point of view.
Okay. Debbie, anything to add?
In my experience, just working with my clients who are millennials, and I work with quite a few, I would say, and this is really shocking, 80% do not know what a CVB is. They've never used a CVB. They've never heard of a CVB. When I always source through the CVBs. They are completely unfamiliar with the services. They do not have the knowledge. So again, I think if a CVB wants to build a relationship with the millennials and find out what's important to them, I really think advisory boards are beneficial because you're going to get in front of them. There are also organizations in our industry. There's an award and a magazine that comes out every year, and it's called, I think 30 Under 30. So it's the top 30 planners that are under the age of 30. And if I worked for a CVB, I would get that publication and I would start reaching out to them. And, our industry is still based on relationships, and just start becoming their friends and build a relationship and find out, why are they not knowledgeable and what would they like to see from a CVB?
Those are great ideas, Debbie. So creating an advisory council in which millennial planners could participate, and then also finding out who those 30 under 30 are and reaching out to them. Stephanie and Cynthia, anything to add in terms of how CVBs could get younger planners to be more engaged with them?
There's really only one thing I thought of as Debbie was talking is, I took a class on virtual meetings and just a lot of information on how to go virtual, and something they talked about for promoting a conference could really work well for promoting knowledge and use of CVBs is create a persona. It's, a character that's based on a real demographic, and then use that persona to market your conference. But in this case, you could market the even existence of CVBs, create a persona based on the millennial demographics and use that in your social media to grab the attention of the millennials, to make them even see anything that you put out there, to have them read further or get further engaged.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, anything to add?
No, I think that was a great point Debbie brought up about their knowledge base. We're working from and from another generational perspective, our ongoing relationship. So, reaching them where they are, whether it's a survey panel or, any kind of method to reach them where they are, to kind of understand like how this community of younger folks really want to be communicated to. And once they see that investment, they'll respond. They really will.
Right. Well, we do have some great audience questions that we want to pose to our panel now. So how are you handling site visits virtually? Are they working? Stephanie, do you want to take this first?
Sure. Well, it's just been a balancing act because we have some open dates. We book 5 years out, and so what we've had to do is kind of make a very clear statement about like what our conservative numbers are, and asking for some flexibility in growth. But on the other hand, asking the hotel to take us on virtual tours and, looking at the space from the lens of, just a virtual lens, and moving sight unseen. And that feels, for our bigger meetings, it feels unnatural, but we have to keep our business going. And so the hoteliers and the cities have been really wonderful, actually using their selfie sticks and moving us all over the city. So that's been really, really helpful. But like I said in the first question, it really has been about the cities that have been very flexible and working as a partner for us to move forward in based on the anxiety that we're currently in.
And Cynthia, just to follow up, do you feel that virtual site visits are working, considering the constraints we're all facing right now?
So I'll admit that I haven't done any virtual site visits right now. Everything that I'm working on for anything in the future is hotels that I was already familiar with. However, and I did not mean to do this plug, but since it came up, I wanted to share something that I've stumbled upon. We were looking, our contract with our floor plan diagramming tool was up, so we were looking at other options out there, and there's a company called All Seated, and there might be others that do this, I'm not aware, but All Seated does diagramming, so you can, lay out your meeting space, and they have social distancing built into it. But additionally, if a hotel is like a partner with them, I'm not sure the exact list of properties that participate with them, but they actually have photos of the hotel's meeting space in their system. So you can go to, say, Hotel XYZ, go to their grand ballroom and literally see what it would look like to have it set crescent round or classroom or theater. So that tool has been, it can be very valuable to look at actual space with different seating diagrams if your hotel that you're interested in is part of their program.
Gotcha. And one of the destinations in the audience submitted a question. They said they're actually going to be hosting a site visit in the coming weeks. And they want to know from the panel, what would you expect as a meeting planner during the visit? Would you expect to tour on your own, do meals on your own? Would you accept gifts? What's your guys' thoughts? Debbie, you want to start us off?
And this is an in-person site inspection?
Yes.
Or virtual?
In person.
Oh, in person. What were the questions again? Would we participate?
Yeah, would you expect meeting planners to participate, or what do you expect as a meeting planner during the visit if you were to go on this in-person site visit? Would you want to tour on your own? Would you want to do meals on your own? Will you accept gifts?
I think I'll always accept gifts.
Me too.
That's just me. I don't want to give up all the perks of our great industry. I think I would do the site visit. I just feel, at some point we do have to start living. We can't live like this forever. We just need to be really safe. The first thing I would need from the hotel would be a list of their guidelines and protocols for the site inspection. I would also need to know how their staff has been trained, because I'm noticing that hotel staff are just, they're just as frustrated as we are. They don't know what to expect. And there's not a lot of empathy anymore for the guests. I'm seeing service go out the window, and that could be a whole nother, panel discussion. But I would need to know what steps that hotel has put in place. I don't think I would need to eat alone, but spacing would have to be laid out. But yeah, and the gifts would be fine.
Just a few more questions before we sign off here. A question from the audience: will you have your attendees wear masks when live meetings resume?
We have not talked about that as a department yet, just because currently we don't have any meetings on the books for the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
It is such a hot topic, and I don't want to put personal opinion in here. So I think what I'd have to say is that we'll base it on the guidelines at the time, the size of the group, how socially able to make the space, and perhaps their feel before we
I think we lost
make
her.
a determination, and maybe have part of the room be, we have that based on it's just such a volatile topic right now, and it's changing day by day. Where I live, yesterday, last second, effective immediately, masks are required, whereas prior to that we were pretty conservative area, or a laid back area where we were as far as the masks go. So I think that one's a tough call to make until we're much closer and we have more data and we know what we're working with.
Sure.
Well, one of the things that our organization did, and as I said, we are not expecting our membership to travel until we're at phase 4. And but what we have invested in is bands that allow people to kind of assess what their level of comfort in without having to that awkward conversation of, oh, I'm not shaking hands today. And they've been marketed as the red, the yellow, and the pink, and it's just like, I'm comfortable with that. And so when they check in, they'll have that. So our expectation that in phase 4 that we won't be needing masks, but there still will be people who will be taking those precautions. So with those precautions, we're giving them a way of maybe a more softer networking tool to say, offhand, you can see that I'm not ready for handshake, but I'll say hi from a distance. So that's just one of the things that we have implemented for in preparation of returning to in-person meetings.
Okay, well, that is all the time we have today, unfortunately. Would love to pick your brains further, but we don't want to keep you guys on for much longer. So thank you so much to the panel of professionals. It was a super helpful look into the meetings industry right now. And thank you all for attending online and for bearing with our technical difficulties through the meeting today. We hope and look forward to seeing you all online again next Tuesday. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.